Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Friday afternoon watercolor workshop. I'm Lorraine Mappa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library and your host for this show. Please feel free to type in the chat box any questions or comments you may have, and I will be happy to relay them to the artist. It is my pleasure to introduce our artist today, Caitlin Keefe. It was our artist in residence the last couple of months in Brambleton Library, and showed people how to use paint pouring techniques and pastels. And her motto in life is anybody can do art, something she's been working on her entire life. So I'm going to hand over the show to her now. Caitlin, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Caitlin Keefe, as Lorraine has said. When I say my motto is everybody can do art, is very simple. You need to just try it, and you need to learn some basic tips and techniques. So what I did is that I had this photo of a frog because I love frogs, and I used this as a reference point. And as you can tell from the painting, that it's not exactly the same. And I want you guys not to try and make a photo copy of it. I want you to experiment, do some different things with the techniques that we're going to be using. We're going to be doing a lot of wet on wet, which is a really fun technique and get some neat designs. For example, on here, this was using wet on wet, where I had some wet paint that was a darker color, and then I just put water on it. But we'll go through that as we go through the thing. One thing I did want to give you guys a tip that I learned that is a very important thing to do. For most of the paint on the frog, I use these Japanese watercolors that I had. And what I do is that for every set that I have, I make a color chart where I'll put a color down, and then especially with watercolor, you have all these different shades and ranges with just one color depending on how much water you put in it. You don't have to mix white with it to get all these different colors for each one of these. And these are just mixing the different colors as well. Like you can get green when you mix yellow and blue and purple with red and yellow, and maybe at some point I'll do a class on color mixing as well. So this is what I recommend everybody do, and it's very helpful. I do it for all my colors, even for my travel case, I do it as well. It really helps you when you're trying to think of what color you want to use, what you've got. And then really quickly, I just want to show you something to do that helps you learn how your brushes work, all your different techniques and everything. You put your color, you put your brand, because that's important. Different brands, colors do different things. And you do some wash, do some effects, like this is wet on wet here, this is wet on wet here. This is using salt, which is also fun to do if you have salt. So I'll recommend that as well, and maybe that'll be another class because I did it for every color that I had in this other case. I also did it for my watercolor pencil one as well. So absolutely recommend that. It teaches you to start learning what your colors actually do, how different they look than sometimes the color that's on your, like this blue looks really dark on here, but it comes out fairly light when you do your painting. This is the palette that I use. You just put, if you're using a tube, you just put a little dab out, and you don't need a lot because it goes a long way. And when it dries, you just reuse it by putting water on it again. All right, so the first thing you do when you're doing a painting, you figure out what you're going to draw and how you're going to draw it. One thing to think about is one reason why this painting works is that there's angles up here and the frog is in the middle. So it keeps your attention towards the middle of that. But that could be yet another class about composition. So for drawing for this one, what I did is that I drew out my frog first a little bit, and then I took what you call a kneaded eraser, which are very fun and wonderful erasers. And what I did is that I just lightly erased off on this side. You can't see it as much, but it's still lightly there. So that markings won't show all the way through from your finished piece. So another important thing to do is tape down your work. If you haven't used masking tape or painter's tape, I would recommend getting it, especially with a wet on wet technique. because when you use a lot of water, your board is going to warp a little bit on your paper. So when you have it taped down, even if it moves and warps a little bit, it'll dry flat and you won't have to worry about the warping. All right, so easy way to look at the frog for just putting your basic drawing down is that it's all a bunch of ovals. So what I would start is just draw a straight line kind of down in the corner, and that'll mark off the edge of where the plant leaf is. And then just draw another straight line across the top here. And then come down, mark off the corner again down here. And then we can start on the frog. Now, even though I've already drawn it, I'm going to show you how to kind of look at it with the frog, excuse me. Is that the head is basically an oval shape. It's like almost a balloon shape, but not quite round. It comes in a little bit here and it comes a little bit flat there. And then when you do the eye, it's the same thing. It's kind of this big kind of oval with these little divots here, which are important whenever you're doing eyes. And I'll show you when we get to that point how that can really make your eyes pop by putting some white there. And also when you're drawing, make sure to also make areas where you're going to have the white, because it's really important to not forget where the white is, because once you paint over it, there is ways of lifting color, but it's a lot harder to get a really white spot unless you use like gouache, or a white ink pen can sometimes cover it up if you wish. That's how it makes the eye really shiny. So circle around, get the head. Now for the feet here, how I did it is that I didn't do it exactly like the picture, because the picture only has one toe, and when I drew it, I didn't quite like that. So I added another one. So don't stick to exactly what you see. If something, when you're copying something, if something feels like it would look better with something, try it. Always experiment. That's the most important thing, is always experiment. Always learn to see what different things you can do. It doesn't have to look like the photo exactly. And so you've got that circle, and then you come down and you think of the body as another oval, and you just kind of can do another oval. And don't worry, if you're doing lightly with your pencil, it's easy enough to erase. So you do another oval shape, and then the only difference is on a frog is that there's this little divot up here, and you just make sure there's a little divot. I'll draw a little harder so you guys.
Can you press a little harder so we can see? Okay, that's better. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll just go over the part that I erased, and then you just get that divot, and then you come down here, and it curls in a little bit, kind of where the back end is. And then you don't have to do real hard here, but you come around here, and this is kind of all like another oval. So you've got the one oval here, and then the other oval here for the body. And then all you do is that you bring down from this oval kind of here and kind of here, and that helps create the body. Now for the legs, it's another kind of oval. This part is over how it is, but don't worry about that right now because you can erase off it. So this is another big kind of oval here, and then another kind of fat oval down here. And then what's really kind of neat and cute about frogs' feet is that they have these round little edges to their feet, the little suction cups. And so you just do that and do a kind of line down like that and bring it in like that. And then when you do the back leg, again, this oval comes up over, and you do kind of an oval like this. And then you kind of do a fat oval over here again. You can just do it lightly in here because that'll be covered. But you've got that oval, and then you've got this long oval down here. That would be where the leg would connect up here. So another oval. And then here is where it's coming out to you. So the suction cup would be a little bit bigger than the other ends of it because that's coming out towards you. And you just kind of pull it down like this for that one. And then for the front one, pull it down and just kind of do like a little suction cup and bring it back up like that. So, and here's the little feet. I did a little suction cup here and then a little one coming out around like that. So the next thing, which if you look at this frog, after you get the eye, like it's another oval, if you didn't get that yet. And then I made an oval for where the white is going to be on here. If you see where, because this is very shiny here. And then this is another shiny part and that's another shiny part. So I made sure to mark that area. You just have to remember not to paint over those areas. And then when you look at it, what I was always get so overwhelmed by the amount of circles and stuff that are on frogs. So when we do this, I do the big ones to make it look sort of like the picture. But then when it comes down to the legs, I want you to experiment and not necessarily stick with exactly what the picture is. You just do a whole bunch of different kind of circles. It comes kind of in a line down, and then some come off the edge. And just put, and don't make perfect circles. Make kind of ovals. Pull some off to the side a little bit, and then a couple more onto his feet. And you can do like little ones like that. So then on the body, you've got this one here. So that's kind of a oval that's not too perfect. You've got the oval up by the eye. Now, when you did the oval up on the head, what you do is that you bring for this circle, you bring that up and follow the edge of that a little bit, and then just bring it around. And like here was another one, so I kind of did a long oval for that. And then here you just kind of draw one like that as if it was going off to the side. Then you've got another long kind of oval here, and then put another one here. Now I'm going to have you erase some stuff in a minute once we put this last big one on. And don't be perfect. Just kind of do it. Make sure there's like little divots or anything. Don't worry or not. Because sometimes the paint will go over it or it looks better and it looks more normal if there's like little divots. Because if you look at the frog, there's all these little divots on it anyways. All right. So now when you come down here, I would get out your eraser and I would erase these lines right here. Because this leg kind of comes in like that. You've got a line that comes like that. And that's what makes the leg look like it's bending and coming out. And then over here, you can just erase the lines in the middle if you want. There's another one down here that you can put in as well. Now don't worry really about the dark ones because we're going to cover that in with paint. And see where the leg curls over? There was kind of like another one here too, so you can just put one there if you wish. Like I said, experiment. Don't make your circles perfect. And then just put some down and it kind of goes in a row, but kind of make your circles not as perfect. And then you erase where you had that leg there. And then you could put, because if you see, none of these are perfect circles. I mean, even the ones that look like really good circles have little divots on them. So just put a couple on there. You can put them however you want. That's the joy of doing art, because you can make it however you want. I consider my artwork kind of like interpretational realism. I like to make it look like it's something, but I tend to use a lot of different colors. Because if you'll notice on this one, it was predominantly purple that I used instead of the black on this, because I wanted to see how it would look. So again, experiment with your colors. You don't have to stick with just the colors I use. Then just go back up to the head and erase out where the ovals came together. because you don't want too many lines on your painting because they'll be able to see through, but you want to be able to get your drawing down well. And then on the same thing, make sure at the bottom of this oval you erase that line and this one. This is the part that always takes the longest when you're doing animals. But while you're doing this, you sit there and you pay more attention to where the light and the dark comes in. Because for this part, you want to make sure not to paint a whole dark swath right there. And so as we're doing it, building it up in layers, you'll see how you can avoid painting over something like that. So just put a couple more however you want on there. And then even though it's hard to see in the back of the foot, you put a couple more on there. And again, just have some fun with it. It doesn't have to be, because you don't want it to look like a polka dot shirt. All right. All right. So I'm going to pull my colors down so I can see them a little bit better. When I do the background, I'll move it off. So if anybody has done wet on wet technique, then you'll understand this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is that when you do your water, I always, especially when I'm doing a lot of wet on wet, I have two. One will be where I put my paint brush that has paint on it, and one will be clear, because I want clear water when I do a couple of the wet on wet techniques. So I'll just move them out of the way so I don't accidentally knock them. Now, so what I do is that I'm going to do this upper part first, so you can see how to do some techniques and play with that before we get onto the frog, is get it really wet. Don't brush a lot of it off, and start putting water down in heavy amounts. Just come up a little bit in front of the frog, and then you just come down over the paper, and you want it very wet, and you'll see why in a minute. Dog hair. Just bring it down a little bit. And one other thing, the kind of paper you use is important too. You want to use smooth paper when you're doing a lot of wet on wet technique, because the water doesn't get soaked up as fast as it does on the rough. So once you got quite a bit of water down in here, then with a lot of water too, I'll put water in one of my colors, but still leave it really, really wet. Don't wipe off anything. And then just start putting water. And you'll see that it does this kind of really neat spreading out on its own. And this helps give a more, in the background, it gives more of an idea of depth, because it's not one flat color. And then if you see it start to dry up a little bit, just go over the sections with your wet brush again. And if, say, you have it's too dark here and you don't like that, you just pull the paint out from some, because we just want to go around the frog a little bit. And so what I also do is wipe off my water there. Now, I'm not too worried about my green mixing, because I'm going to use another color green to mix in here. So I get it pretty wet again. I use this kind of turquoise, but you can get that color by mixing blue and green if you want. And then this one's a little bit more opaque. If you see how thick that's coming on some, you just sort of move it in there. Now, one thing when I'm doing a background, what I'm always trying to be cognizant of is the colors that I'm going to use on whichever animal I'm doing, because you're going to want to have a little bit of that color in there. So my frog's going to have a little bit of orange or yellow. So I clean my brush a little bit. And I'll get some yellow. And I'll just kind of put some dots in. And if you notice, the dots kind of spread and kind of do their own thing depending how much water is there. You just put a little bit on there. And that sort of will give a feeling, if you look here, give a feeling of the different colors and stuff. And I like to put on the edges of them, sometimes a little bit darker. So darker color. So maybe I will use some of my violet because I use so much, or mauve is whatever the purple is that I go back and see I had this blob here from the last time I did this. And all you do is put some water and it reactivates it. And then I just put, you kind of drops and you can just kind of move them around a little bit. And it's going to end up spreading out. If you notice, your colors should be spreading out depending how wet it is. And just put a little bit in there. So then you do the same thing for the other side. Get predominantly just water, a wet brush. And see, look, I don't know if you can tell on there, but I was using the water that I had been rinsing water out, and there's some color in the water now. So if you don't, now I like a lot of color, so I don't like any areas that are really pure white except for the highlights. So it doesn't bother me too much, but in a little bit, once you get much more paint in there, then you'll want to use your other one for the wet on wet so that you don't have colors mixing that you don't want to mix. And don't worry about being perfect on there. Stay a little bit further away. Just bring in more water. And if you can't tell if you have enough water, always look, you can look down to the side a little bit and then you can see if it's shiny and then you know there's plenty of water. So let's do this side. Get again the wet brush. Continue with whatever color you used. And then just kind of lightly dab on the color, get it wet again. And sometimes if you use darker, if you look at it, see how it spreads out in a really wet area. You can also get your brush wet again and then place it on top and move it around to get different kind of techniques. You use a lot of this like when you're drawing trees too. So the main thing is to just experiment. And let's just get some more coverage on here. And if say there's an area like this part, if it's too dark, what you can do is if you've got a really wet brush, you can still move it around while it's still wet and wipe it away if you want. But I'm going to get a little bit more color in here. And I sometimes just move the brush around like that. I don't know if you can tell easily on here, but it's like really wet here at this top part. So it's mixing really well. And this is more of a straight line. So you go back, get a little bit more water and just put it on there and it'll move it around some. And if you look up to see where your other colors dried some, you'll see how the pigments moved around a little bit. And you can always go back and put a more wet on wet. Don't worry about it if it's bending some. It'll flatten out when you're done. And you don't want it too dark around the frog because we're going to be putting shadows in there as well. So just kind of keep it a little bit light. Because in watercolor, the main thing to do is that you're doing layers and you're building up from light to dark. Everyone has their own way of doing it. But I found out if you draw in the areas that are going to be all white and are aware of the areas that are going to be lighter, then it's easier to just build up from there. So now for this section, I'm just going to put some more water down, and don't go over the line that you did, because that'll be a slightly darker color, because you're going to want it to look like the underside of the leaf. So get some more water on there. And then remember, have your brush don't rinse all the water out when you put in your new colors. Oops, and if you accidentally go over, no big deal. And then just go get more color when you need it. And you want to try not to get your water into your frog, because the paint will go right into there. The paint will follow the water. And if you end up getting lines, don't worry. Just move your brush around a little bit, or go get some more water and put it on there. I'm going to bring a little bit more color into here. I'll pick up some of this because it's a little dark. All right, and then like we did up there, go back and get some of your purple and maybe put some randomly down in the corner, maybe a couple other spots. When we go back and do the shadow, I'll put a lot more purple down along the edges, but we don't want to do that yet. And then maybe just another dab of yellow in a few places. Maybe along the edge of the leaf. And if your paint is dried out and it's not moving around, remember, just go ahead and get some more water and you can put it on there. That's kind of the fun of the wet on wet technique, is to just see how different things go. And you can always go back to where you were before and put a couple kind of drops, see what they're going to do, see how they spread out, and kind of build up some texture. There's not many things in life are pure straight colors except for graphic artists. And if you get some hair on there, no worries, to try and pick it up, and then you can just cover in there. And see how the color spreads out and everything. Just kind of does its own thing. All right, so now what we're going to want to do is, I realize I didn't connect those, so I'll go back and connect them. Is for the colors up here, what I did is that I used a little bit of the orange that I used for the frog. Just get a little bit of the orange that I used. And then have your brush fairly wet, and then just do the kind of the same thing. Put it down in kind of a line. And then what I did is that I went and picked up a little bit of the green and just kind of put some down to just see what it's going to do. I'm a Bob Ross fan in the fact that there are no mistakes, only happy little accidents. All right, and then for this section, how I did it on the painting is that I just did the green again, but I put a little bit more of the white, so well, not the white, more of the yellow, so the yellow was the more dominant color. So wanted the green to be the more dominant, the red to be kind of striking here. And when we get down to here, I have some of the red, because that kind of makes it more like a shadow on here and makes it a little bit more of a dramatic kind of color field. All right, so let's get a lot of water on that again. Then let's just fill in this triangle. And also it's good to have by your side paper towels. So if your brush is getting too dirty, or if you want to get the colors off, it's a good way to clean it. So I always have paper towels next to me when I work. So get a little bit of yellow, kind of do like a line here, line, and then just kind of a squiggle and let it do its own thing. What's also nice too is when you tape down at the end of it, you know, the next day after it's completely dried and flattened out again, when you pull off the tape, you get a really nice white edge. When you pull it off, that looks really nice too. All right. So one thing that I always do before I start doing an animal or a person is that the eyes are what makes the painting. So I'm just going to pull this up a little bit so that you could see. Oops, go that way. The eye is not black. The eye is a purple combination, and it's a couple different colors. It's not flat. There's a couple different things in there. So as we do that, I got my dark purple, and I didn't have as much water in there. This is where, when you start working on the frog for the details, you make sure that it's not a whole lot of water so that it's darker when you put it on. And you just kind of outline. Make sure you don't go over the area that's going to be white. And then I'm going to dry my brush some. And then I'm going to put just a little bit of the green in there. Because remember, eyes, especially when they're very shiny, reflect color. So I just put a little bit of green in there too. And you can use your smaller brushes if you want to. This brush is just really handy. It goes to a real nice point too as well. But you can use your smaller brushes if you want to for the detail on this. And then I just kind of go in with my brush and lighten it up a little bit because I want that to dry, because I'm going to go back again and make another layer with the darker purple later. All right, so the question is, what do you start with now? What we're going to do is that we're going to pretend that there are, since the white in here on the legs that you see, that's not actually white. That is a light blue. So take your big brush or your medium one, get it pretty wet again. Go find your blue, get it pretty wet, and get not a whole lot of paint on it, but what we're going to do is go to the areas where it's going to be the darkest and kind of go around on the darker areas just for right now. And then I'm going to show you what we're going to do to make it shade onto the other areas. So just like a little bit here. And see, I'm already losing the color some, which is fine. You can always go back. But now what we're going to do to get a little bit of shade is I went and put just a lot of water on this again. And you just sort of pull it up. Pull it up from where the middle of the paint is. And it's fine if you go over the colors a little bit because it's always kind of darker in there. My brush is shitting. Get off some of this here. And then not too much wet in color. And I'm sorry, I have dogs that are barking. And then bring this down. Don't worry about going over the circles. You can go back to this area now and then just kind of bring Bring the water up a little bit and the paint will go with you. And there's ways to fix it if you make a mistake that you think you made a mistake. Is you can either get your paintbrush really wet again and just pull up the paint, or you can even use a little paper towel and just put it on there and it'll pull up some of your color. But you want to make sure when you do that, you dab it. You don't rub, or else you're going to rub the paint all over. So let's just layer up a little bit, get some more of the darker blue. You know, kind of around the edges of stuff. Some in here. And remember, back where you've got this back leg, you're going to have some darker areas where the frog's leg is bending over itself. And then you've got some darker areas back here. And there's also a little area where it juts out some here. And you can use a darker color to make that more prominent if you wanted. And you, again, you can just dab in with wet paint. And you can sometimes get some pretty neat effects just doing that. Because like on this part of the leg, when I was doing the wet on wet, was just like how I did on the around the edges and stuff. I put it pretty wet and just really light blue, and then I would put darker paint right on it. All right, let me show you. So I would just dab and then just let it do its thing a little bit. Do some in the crease of the foot and around the feet. Don't forget these little toes over here. Put a little bit of color on them. And bring up around there. So what I would do now is clear your brush, get most of the paint off of it, and then just get your brush with a little bit more water on it. And again, you just kind of pull some of the water into it. And when you just do that with the regular water, you'll start getting some shading going on. You can just put a little dab into your clean water. Just pull it around the edges of where the paint is, and you'll see that the paint goes towards it and makes a lighter area. And again, remember, this is the time to just kind of experiment. Don't get caught up thinking it has to look exactly like a photo. Some of the best work ever done was by the masters learning something new in their practicing that they incorporated into their artwork. So put a little bit of clear water there, and with these guys, because you can just pull the paint up, and if it's still wet, you can pull it up and just push it around a little bit. Now this part has dried, so what I'm going to do is get a little bit more of the wet and just pull some of the water back down into it and just kind of soften out those edges. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just that's a way to soften out some of the edges. Let's see, and now that we have this dark area, is that my brush has picked up some paint and it's a very light blue now. And so I'm pushing that around the whole thing. You can go over your dots too. Because like I said before, not many things are pure white. Even a pure white dove has many, many colors in it. So just kind of cover it around with that light color that you get just from picking up some of the paint that's already there. And again, to soften up any edges if you want, just get your brush with some clean water. And you can either push it around, push it up some. All right, so this top part is all orange, but I'm actually going to do the orange last. So what I'm going to start now doing is after I get this side, because I forgot about this side, get his legs a little bit blue. Is we're going to start doing the spots. Now, if you remember, I showed you kind of what a wet on wet can do for here. This is where I put down kind of a darker layer of purple, and then I took a clean brush with just clean water and dropped it on there. So we're going to try that, and it gives a really neat kind of textural effect. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush with a lot of water on it, go back to my purple. All right, now I think I might have gotten a little bit too much dark on there. So I'm just going in, picking up some with that. And see how it's spreading around a little bit? I kind of like that look because this part was still wet, so it still kind of goes into it. But you can take your brush, get some water on it, and just put a dot. And the dot will do all these. I'm trying to see if you guys can see or not, but it's putting all these little kind of starbursts in there. Now don't worry about it if it leaks into the blue, because you can always mix it up a little bit. And at the end of it, we're going to outline it anyways, which will make it look nice. Because this whole area is kind of dark anyway, so if purple gets in to the non-spot area, that's fine. So what I would do is try that technique with the other purple spots, like this one here. And then just take your brush, put a little dot, and just kind of see what it does. Another way you can do it is if it's really light, which I'll do on the next one because this is dark. Just put a couple dots of the water. And I'll make these white kind of constellations maybe. And another way you can do it is if you put a very light colored wash of the purple, very light. We'll do that for this one. So that one's pretty light. So what you do is you go back and you get some of the paint where it's thick, and then you just go and drop a little dot in there and just see how that kind of goes around. So that's very purpley. You can also go back and drop it into what you've done before if you wanted to make it darker. Also a neat effect, if you ever try it, is using salt. That can make really neat things. So you can go in and put some water on the middle of it, move it out a little bit. So right now I go and put purple in all the spots. And it doesn't have to be the same shade purple in any of these. You know, and then again, you can pick it up and try and drop, and then it'll dry in a different kind of way. So this is pretty wet that I put on there. This one's pretty wet. I'm going to go back and put some dark. Now make sure you're not painting over your white stuff when you get up here. Don't paint over those two middle ones, because that area we want to keep to be kind of white. So let's do the purple on the legs. I'm just putting a little bit of darker color. And then I'm going to use some water just to pull those out. We're going kind of fast because we have the hour and a half. And so sometimes the water will seep out of your puddles, but that's fine. Once it's dry, it won't seep into your colors. See, like this one didn't have colors around it, so it wasn't seeping. This one did a little bit, but I still think that looks really neat how that happened. So I'm not going to worry about that. And then I'm just putting, and constantly go back and get the paint off when you want to do the white so that you remember to have clean water when you're doing it, unless you deliberately want to mix the colors. I forgot about this little guy. We'll make him completely purple. That's his other toe. So the only times you really want to make kind of the circles dark are near the back end foot because it's under a lot of shade. So I'm making those a little bit darker. And remember, it's just, and make that back toe kind of purple because it's underneath the shade of him as well. So put a little couple. Get some of that in there. So we got this big one up here that I'm going to do light, and then I'm just going to play with putting some of the darker purple in it. Just to see what that does. Maybe put a little bit of blue on his other toes. And you can always go back and put a little bit of color in here. You know, just kind of play around. All right. So at this point, I would let it dry usually for a little bit before I would start putting on the other colors. But most, all right. So now let's play with the orange a little bit. Let's get some orange. Now, I mix a lot of colors sometimes on here. So what I'll do is that I'll try not to make this too dark, bring this out some. And again, I'm just kind of going off what I did, but doing things differently if I want to. Is that now I'll get some of the yellow and I'll put the yellow right on that kind of orangey blue and bring the colors around. Because when it's wet on wet, the colors really do some neat effects. And again, remember, do not color your white areas. The top of the nose area is lighter than the back middle part. So I'm using a little bit more of the yellow. And then what I do is get some of the paint off, get some clear, put some water down, and then maybe get some of the red because it's a little darker. And see, you can use that to make some neat effects with the wet on wet. And you can just pull it around. And then I can go back and still mix some orange in here, make some neater colors with the wet on wet. And be careful going around these because if these colors are still wet, it'll help pull some of the ink paint into your thing. So kind of make sure to not go into it too much. But if it does, it still looks cool, so don't worry about it. And then it gets a little bit lighter as you go down the body of the frog. So I got some more yellow out, and then I just kind of pull it down a little bit so the colors kind of mix. Now see how some of the color pulled off that, and some of that still looks cool. Because this is kind of where the light is hitting onto the frog. Oh, I missed a purple. Now see, a lot of purple got into this area. So I'll show you how to pick up paint from areas. You just get a bunch of water and you can just pick it up that way. Smush it some. Clean your brush off, get some more. just regular water. So that way when I put the red around those, I forgot a purple guy here. Let's make him purple. And so to make this a little bit more distinctive, since it merged out a little bit, I'm going to go back without using a lot of water because I don't want it to leak too much. And I'll just bring it around and bring it in towards the inside. And then as I'm pulling red around on here, I know it'll mix some, but that's fine. Because again, it's all about experimenting, seeing what the colors will do with the water, how they'll mix along the sides and stuff. And there's just a little bit of red that came into the frog here. And while that's drying, we'll go over and paint this side. So what I'm going to do for this one is again get a full brush, just completely wet. Cover that up with water. And then what I did is use some of the red and I use that as kind of the color for the shadow underneath the leaf. Then we want to put some of the green back in there. So again, just kind of play around and see how your colors are going to move around. And see, it did this really neat effect where it pulled all the red kind of under. So, and maybe just use a little bit of the darker green. Draw a little line there. Oops. All right, so let's go back to the eye. We're going to get a little bit. Now, at any point, you can change your brush if you're not comfortable with the bigger brush to use the smaller one. I will change right near the end where I outline everything. I'll use a much smaller brush. But and also be wary. Do not rest your hand onto the artwork because you've got wet over here. Otherwise, you're going to end up with paint all over your arm. So put a little bit of the darker kind of in like dots around like that. And then I'm going to clean the brush because in order to give it a little bit more texture, I'm going to put the littlest bit of water on it, of clear water, and then just kind of drop it in. Give it a little bit of texture around there. Because the eye is probably the darkest thing on here except for some of the dots if you did it for the spots on the frog. All right. And what we can do now is go back and build up the red. I got quite a bit of pigment on it this time. And then you got to be real careful because this eye was still wet, so the eye leaked into the eye some. So normally I would let it dry for a lot longer between painting times. Maybe bring a little bit red up there because that's kind of in the shadow of the eye. Bring it around your spots a little bit. You can bring it down in here some. And then what I'm going to do is clean the brush, get a little bit more of the yellow because I want the yellow to be a little bit more dynamic. So let's get that second layer on there and then put some yellow where it goes near the red. And since it's a wet brush, it'll do some interesting effects. But we'll get some of that yellow in there. You can just get some yellow and just dot it on there. And that helps it make it look like the pebbly skin of the frog. Remember, this is all about play, not perfection. And if you just put like a dry brush into the watercolor, you can get a much deeper color versus a washed out one. And then you can just put some red kind of over the yellow and little dots to kind of help give it that pebbly effect. And you can always wash off your brush, get clear water on it again, and just pull it down if you want to, shade it into the other colors a little bit. And you just kind of go back and start refining a little bit of your areas around the edges. I think what I'm going to do for some of these ones back here, remember I just put a little bit of the darker purple, so I'm going to put some water and just sort of let the colors go into it some. I was just seeing if this is dried enough or if it would take some additional manipulation or not. Looks like it dried. All right, and so what I would do now is that we want to bring a little bit of shading up into the legs, make them a little bit darker while the rest of the top of the frog tries to dry off some. So get your blue again, but you can always go over to your palette and use it to see if it's too dark or if it needs more water in it or not. So that looks pretty good because I wanted kind of a middle color. So I'm just going around the edges and kind of building up a little bit more shading. And if it's wet, you can just do more of the kind of dotting around and seeing how that works. Go back, get some more. But you want to leave kind of this middle area light because that's where the light reflects off of the frog. I got a little too dark, so I'm going to pull that back a little bit. And don't worry about it if they get muddied, because when we go back over and outline them, it'll make it pop. All right, since we're coming close, got about 20 minutes left. I want to show you now. I'm just trying to rush through so you can get through this, but I recommend taking some time and just playing. Is that I'm going to take one of the thinner brushes, depending which one you have. I might use a really thin one. One other thing that's a neat tool to have if you haven't seen these yet, these are these uh, containers that have water in them and then the brush, and you can brush the water out on them. They're very handy to use, especially if you're going out and doing plein air or going outside to work on them. I absolutely recommend playing with it. You can do just as well with a regular brush. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take a real small brush, get it into my purple, and then I'm just going to very lightly go around and outline. It doesn't have to be perfectly on it. It can stick out a little bit. So you'll go back, get more line. And this is where you can go back and make that line too distinctive where the leg came in. And remember, no frog is perfectly shaped, so, and you can outline those as well, outline the spots some. If you let it dry more between your colors and you don't get quite the mixing that we got, but I wanted to be able to show you as many techniques as I could. So you just go through and kind of outline. Now you don't have to outline, but I kind of liked how it ends up showing a little bit more of the pulling it together, like where all the different colors mixed and stuff. So that's what I would do for there. I'd outline, if we have the time, to outline all the little guys. But I'm going to show you, because see how much it moves when it's still wet? But let's go back to the eye, because remember the eye is one of the most important things. So I'm going to outline the eye. And remember when you do it, there's these little areas that pudge out a little bit. That's where, bring that across there. And what you can do is make a few little lines in there. And then I kind of outline the white part, make that more of a clean kind of thing. Outline what kind of purple that was by the nose. And then when you outline the toes, remember it comes out kind of like in a little circle for the suckers. And see, even in these areas that got stained, when you go back and you do an overlay over it, it looks really cool. But again, for the outlining, I would have waited till it was completely dry, so there wouldn't be any bleeding of the colors. But I want to make sure that you guys have time to ask questions if you have any. And then you can go and put a little bit of definition up around his legs some. Does anybody have any questions? Hopefully that's good.
I think everyone's just busy painting.
You can always add in other dots if you think if there's another dot that would go in a space you think you missed. And then depending where you are, you want to put in some shadow because the shadow is going to anchor your frog to the paper. Because right now there's nothing anchoring him to that. He looks like he's just hanging in midair. So what I did is that I got some more of the purple. And I just pulled a little bit underneath. And then I'm going to use water to pull it out around. Dry that off a little bit. And just get the littlest bit of water. And you just pull the water to kind of soften those edges some. Yeah, and just put a little bit around those. And like you say, if you think the shadow is a little bit too dark, just put the littlest bit of water on there and pull it up some. And if you use like gouache or anything, gouache is a very opaque watercolor. You can go back and put in highlights and other stuff. This yellow is pretty opaque in some ways, but it disappears into the red. But you can go back and put highlights, say with almost a dry brush, get on a decent amount of the, sorry, find out where it is. Find a decent amount of the paint on there and then just kind of scrub it on. Just dot it on and it helps give some pebbling to the skin as well. So that's one way to highlight it. Now I'm going to outline the eye a little bit more. To get fine lines, you really need to wait for it to completely dry. Otherwise, the water will go where it wants to. And it will take the paint along with you.
Caitlin, can you explain again how you painted the big spots and the trick with the tip of the brush with water?
To make the to make this, to make that, is that it was a little bit
You,
it was a little bit too wet. So what you do is that you drop water into it. Get this. Once it's too wet, you can't do it. But say if it's wet, you can get and then drop in a color. Or if it's a really dark one, then you can just do like this one. It was lightened up, so I just used a very wet brush and just dropped it on. So if you wanted to do how I did this one, is that it was kind of a darker color and it was still kind of wet, but it dried a little bit. And then I took a completely clean brush with just clear water and just dabbed into little spots on it. This was just a little bit too wet when we were doing it, so it didn't pop up as much as that one did because we were trying to make sure I got it in the time. But that's one of the way the wet on wet technique. It's like this. This this one again was had one color, and then you put the wet water just on top of it. This is where you put the darker pigment into a wet wash. So, but we were doing so much trying to show it to you, it spread too much. I hope that answered the question.
Norma, I unmuted you. Did that help? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Did that help, Norma?
yes. Thank you very much. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And this is just to show you, this is what the salt does. I don't know if you can see it when it's wet and you put salt on it, salt crystals, and then when it dries, you rub it off, and you've got a neat effect too. But this is the effect that I was attempting to do, but it just got a little bit too wet. And if it's too wet, then it spreads too fast. So it's kind of, you find a middle ground where it dries a little bit, and then you put more water on it. But again, I recommend doing these. It takes time, but it really helps you learn how to use your brushes, helps you experiment playing with what water can do. When you pick up stuff like this, I was picking up paint from it with just the brush. There's splatter technique, which would look pretty neat on the frog. Um, you can also use spray that you could spray and it'll do water things. Also handy things to have. This is my little thing of salt that I carry. If you're doing splatter, your toothbrush is really handy. You get a little bit of the pigment on and then you just go like this, but be careful to point down towards your thing. Otherwise you're going to spray everything around you. Sponge also does a neat technique where it can pick up, that dried too fast, but where it can pick up stuff or it can make really neat, if I don't know if you guys can see that, but it can make some neat effects as well by using that. I'm just trying to think of all the different things that I have that could help out. Oh, also for using the white too, if a lot of people that do a lot of fine detail with white, this is called a liquid frisket, and it's basically use a brush and you would put it on in the white spots. And then once your painting is dry and everything, you would use one of these to pick it up. I forget what they call this. It's used like an eraser, a rubber cement eraser. and then you would just rub it off and it would peel right off and everything, and you'd have the fine lines for the white. So that's something to do if you're doing like a great big wash, but you wanted places to be completely white in that. I would use a Frisket to do that. Otherwise, it would be really hard to do a wash with really fine lines in there. So that's something neat to play with. And also, I was telling you, I can't remember if I showed you guys the gouache, but this is a brand that I found to be really nice. And I made, again, you know, like how I did for all my watercolors, where I did a little color chart. I did, this is the color. See how much more opaque these paints are, the gouache, and then these are mixed with white, because you really have to mix it with white to get that. But if I wanted to, I could use the gouache. It dries up, but all you have to do is just spray to reactivate it. Oops, had a little bit of purple in there. But it comes opaque and you can use that. See how that bright it up. Also, one tip when you're doing eyes, put a little dot of white at each end. Like if you're looking at somebody, if this was somebody's eye, put a little white at each end, because that's where light hits in these little round areas at the edges of the eyes and it helps pop it out. So gouache can do that as well. So that helps with the white areas. But I think the most important thing, and anything that I can like let people understand, is just to experiment, is just to play, because watercolor can be a very finicky medium and it can be very hard to do with it. But if you come into it with the expectation of experimentation and learning how to do it, every time you do it, you learn how the water works or the brush works with it. And you can really get some neat effects once you keep playing with it. And like I said, doing these made a big difference for me. But does anybody have any other questions? I hope this helped you guys and you guys had some fun making a frog.
Thanks, Caitlin. I wanted to let everybody know that Caitlin will be back on October 7th for another virtual watercolor class. And she'll also be teaching some paint pouring classes tomorrow at Lovettsville. And let me see, on the 24th of September at Percival. On the 8th of October at Middleburg.
And then it's Sterling, I think, on the Saturday in between those. The 17th? No. So it's almost 4 Saturdays in a row.
You can check out library.loudoun.gov and look on our website. And if you just put in paint pouring, you'll get all our upcoming in-branch programs. And we also have portrait sketching programs at Gum Spring and Ashburn, once a month at each branch. And the branches themselves have a lot of our programs coming up. So check out our calendar. And thank you all so much for joining us today.